talking about 2015, which was the origin story of HerdDogg, which is the livestock technology company that I and my colleague here founded in 2015. This is David Duppy Proctor. He's my co-founder in HerdDogg and one of my greatest friends. And I'm thrilled to have him with me today to talk through this really cool story of how we got started with HerdDogg.
First of all, it is okay to call me Duppy. I'm an engineer. I started in electrical engineering and then did really high speed computers. Then focused on handhelds and helping with the design, architecture, manufacturing of a lot of consumer handhelds. And Melissa since grade school. We kind of gone our separate ways. With her building rovers, driving around farms, and me building handheld MP3 players and phones. But I consciously started really getting excited about the maker movement and switching into Internet of Things. And that's when I met Melissa again by chance at this conference.
So I'll just give you a little bit of background in how we were moving in this direction, and then Duppy and I can really riff on what we were able to do during 2015. So I was in the process of developing another all-terrain vehicle company. I had started as Rogue Rovers, and I had created a product called the HerdDogg, which was a little different than my original ATV, the Model 1, because it was a bench seat. You could get in and out on either side. Your feet were as close to the ground as possible. There was no obstruction. You weren't straddling a vehicle. And the other cool thing about the HerdDogg is that it had a steering column that all of the controls worked from. So there were no foot pedals or anything. The vehicle was really intended to be an autonomous vehicle. And my idea was to bring that autonomous vehicle into the field and have it start collecting data. And I happened to make a visit to a ranch outside of Southern Oregon, in Klamath Falls area, and was demoing this product to a bunch of ranchers. In and amongst the cows, we were driving the ATV around. The owner of the property said, this thing would be really cool if you could make it collect data from the cows, because our biggest problem is that in trying to get IDs off of the animals, we have to get into the herd to be able to see the ear tag ID. So it'd be really cool if you could collect that automatically into this vehicle. And I was like, wow, that's kind of an interesting idea. And then I was invited to a conference to present the vehicle. It was a maker faire type conference. They had tech people like myself demoing our products, and I demoed the HerdDogg, this ATV, as part of their startup group. And that's the event that I ran into Duppy at. I was invited to visit the White House by the Obama people. They had their first, and I guess at this point we now know was the only, demo day, which was a very cool event. And he invited all of these folks to the White House. I have some pretty cool pictures of myself on my ATV at the west entrance, because we couldn't bring it inside the White House. It actually wouldn't even fit through the doors. We tried. But they stationed me out front, so when people were coming into the event, I was there with my vehicle. Got to meet a lot of people. There were some luminary folks at the event, including the president, obviously. He gave a speech about innovation in America, and I was selected as one of his, I don't know what you call it, the backdrop. And the very next day, just out of pure coincidence, I had also been recognized by the American History Museum, which is a Smithsonian museum, as a rural innovator for this HerdDogg vehicle that I had built. And there was this whole display at the Smithsonian on me and what I was doing in electric vehicles.
At the Lemelson exhibit in the American Museum at Smithsonian, and this is the exhibit on the Rogue Valley, and of course, I'm in it, so I was really happy to be here.
And then we were able to go to the museum and see a bunch of other things while we were in Washington, D.C., and then went back to Oregon. And then it was really trying to figure out how to engage with Duppy and what we were going to design in order to build this new concept of, data collection from livestock ear tags. The idea of putting putting data on livestock really appealed to me, and it's a very difficult industry because of having to put tech on animals.
Yeah, environmentally harsh environment, right? You're proud of your phone being able to, like, go a couple feet underwater, get in the rain, right? Try putting it on the ear of a cow,
Yeah,
for a year
that's
through
right.
ice and mud and other animals literally chewing, other animals literally chewing on them.
That's right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's definitely a harsher environment for electronics.
Oh, and I started looking at existing systems that were out there, and nothing really was a long range readability. You were able to get RFID reads if you put a wand or a device at animal that near the animal head, but data being collected on the animal and then being transmitted at any distance was really not available at the time. There was one system that was kind of in the works, and that was quantified ag. I ran into those guys several times at multiple trade shows. The now CEO of HerdDogg actually was like their commercial director before the company got sold to, I think they got sold to Merck. But the system, quantified ag system, was like inserted in the animal's ear and then it was stapled on. It wasn't supposed to function as both an ear tag and a device. And what Duppy and I really were trying to do, and I'll let you talk a little bit more about this, Duppy, but really, my background working at Apple, around design, innovation, user interface, and Duppy's background was a perfect match because we have this discipline that we were indoctrinated in our respective areas. So Duppy, why don't you talk more about that?
Yeah, it's, Melissa mentioned spent some time at Apple, and it's kind of funny because I spent some time at Microsoft and, working on Zoom, but then at Flip Video, working on handheld cameras. And like I said, then I was starting to work on the handhelds were kind of starting to become mature. I could see it starting to happen, and I wanted something, a brand new frontier in Internet of Things, right? So I was hooking up sensors, and it was just really fortuitous, right? I just love working on technical problems. But I'd also, as far as startups go, I'd done a lot of startups experiences, and I just finished reading the book The Lean Startup by Ries, and concepts like MVP and lean manufacturing were, those are things that rang true to me that I had found had worked for me through both large companies doing brand new products, new markets, but also at startups, which of course are always a brand new product and new market. And those terms put some words to some practices that I already knew were successful. And what was important was I know how to build something, but the key finding of kind of Lean Startup was most people ended up building the wrong thing by not having a tight enough feedback loop with their customers. And that's where it was great partner with somebody who goes out there and actually gathers good data from the customers, right?
So I came back from the trip to Washington, D.C., pretty excited about working on this new version of our system. As Duppy said, we had to come to terms with the fact that building an ATV, which would have been a $15,000 to $20,000 price, retail price, was totally unnecessary. Like if you could put something into a small device, then you could put it on your existing ATV or you could put it on your dog. And so we really started riffing on this idea that it wasn't a big system, it didn't have to be a complicated system, but how do we architect something that is economically viable for a rancher to use on a multitude of animals, on, on theoretically on all of his herd. And then this magic thing happened. This year it was really a magical year. I was contacted by the guys that were doing this TV show called America's Greatest Makers. And it was Intel and Mark Burnett production. So Mark Burnett, Shark Tank. What else did he do?
Survivor.
Survivor. The Trump Show. I forget the name of it. But they contacted me about auditioning for the show, and they contacted Duppy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at that point it was like, well, let's do this. We had been talking about it, and then suddenly we had a date that we were to go, audition for the show. I guess we had the pre-audition, and then we had to do another audition, and there were like several sort of online auditions before we were selected to be physically in the same room as this whole production team. And by then we had our ducks in a row. We knew what we were wanting to do. We knew we wanted to go after livestock. I really did a lot of detail work around like, what are the value propositions? What are the pain points? And I think it primarily focused on disease, outbreak, being able to identify and gather data off of animals without stressing them out, which is still even to this day, it's a big deal, right? You have to rope your animal to read the ID or, to do what you need to do to it. But we had a pretty good story, and we had one more person on our team, Jeff
Platt.
Chief.
His dad was a chief on Get Smart. Yeah.
And he looked just like his dad, Chief from Get Smart. Yeah. I had just a little bit more there about why everything kind of came together is I was off working on sensors, trying to find jobs to build IoT sensors, because I had been working at Quirky, where I set up a West Coast kind of electronics manufacturing for their product design, and had one of the best teams, one of the best maker spaces at the company. And we did literally dozens of electronic products and sensors. And unfortunately, they'd gone out of business. So not only was I looking, but we showed up for the auditions, and two people, that were on my team, two of my engineer employees from my team at Quirky had formed a team and been invited separately. We didn't know, saw them at auditions.
Oh, that's
that
right.
was
I'd forgotten
fun.
about that.
That was fun. Remember, that was fun to have a little little rivalry there. And of course, there are a bunch of people from the maker community, right? So that was that it turns out we already knew people in common. So we let go of the electric vehicle by then, and we were just going to do the tags and keep it simple. I was also encouraged by, well, if we got to do this for this game show, we better keep it simple.
Yeah.
Oh, and Intel was doing the game show because they wanted people to use their new tiny low power
Curie
sensor.
Module.
Yeah, the module, right?
Yeah, the Curie module. And
as far as I know.
And it was their second season. So they had done like an online season to kind of test the idea of doing this.
Yeah, they had.
And this was their second season, and it was on TNT. So it was actually it was a true reality TV show on TNT, promoted big time. And but the idea was the Curie module. We had to embed the Curie module into our device. Yeah,
which was their version of a low cost, low power chip, and they brought out the big guns behind Mark Burnett for the second season. And so, that was crazy to go through a whole audition process there. But, in order to find out lost cows, I was going to get the data. I wasn't just going to have a mesh network, which if you technically there's networks, and mesh networks were kind of a little more complicated than leading edge. I was going to do a mesh database. So the data, not only the network, but like the data from every cow was going to be distributed on every other cow, kind of like some big, Tor network or something. And I was so excited about that. I even made up a little mesh database dance that I did for Mark Burnett during the audition. I did this dance. And, but again, to refer back to one of the biggest lessons, I learned in getting successful was like, don't fall in love with like the complexities or new engineering, things. If you're going to do a product, you're not inventing, you're not doing research, do the do just what the customer needs, right? And just enough, just barely what they need, and enough to differentiate you, enough to be better from any other solution out there. But you don't need much from an engineer. From an engineer's point of view, our job is to come up with more and more and more and more ideas, right? Like more is better. And it's a really hard lesson to learn. I've learned it so hard over the years that more is not better. More is more complex, takes more time. At some point you can't even explain it to the customer, right? So it's like, why you're really wasting it. You could even add it and it could even be working, and it's just too much stuff, and the majority of customers just won't even discover that it does it, right? They want 3 things max.
What I loved about our team was we had nothing. We went in with an absolute concept. There were some teams that had demo products or things that they'd already developed together. They were companies, or in some cases like us, they didn't have anything. I kind of like those guys better because it felt like a true maker environment. Like, we're going to invent this for the TV show, and that was really what we were doing. And what's cool is that the Curie module was a Bluetooth system as well, using Bluetooth. And that was what Duppy had already said, we're going to do this with Bluetooth. And I was like, okay, but I mean, is it going to be robust enough? Are we going to be able to transmit data far enough? Like, how? So we were kind of already going through the process of our selection for technology. But to your point, there were kind of these big cluster of what the system was supposed to be. So it could be like disease detection, it could be sort of breeding detection, lost cows, just ID reading. There were these big, very specific use cases, and we had no idea. We had no idea which one we were going to settle on. Like, we didn't know. Now we auditioned for the show. There was probably 60 teams or something like that. I can't remember. They gave us like 5 minutes to demo or pitch ourselves to the team. And I'll never forget this. Mark Burnett, he had like a scarf on and stuff like that. He's British. And what really got him was the whole mad cow disease idea, right?
That's right. They just recovering from mad cow disease.
They were just recovering it from, and we were saying that we could detect illness in cattle and prevent animals from being destroyed as a result of early detection, or at least where the disease was spreading. And he was just, I think he was just completely taken with that, because it was a huge financial, economic, food safety issue in the UK. So it really, that resonated with him for sure. Well, we were selected to be on the show with I think another 23 teams. And then it was like, let's go. So like the next day after being selected, they dragged us into the tech shop in San Francisco, and they said, you got $10,000. You got to put together a product using the Curie module, and you're going to have 4 or 5 days this week, and then we're going to start filming in February. So you better be ready. And it was like,
and they filmed this even during the initial week, they walked around and filmed us, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like, was it like the end of every week, or even more often? At the end of, or even more often, they had us give presentation. Like, we're given a presentation pretty often.
We were, in addition to being on the television show, I think one of the best things that they did for us was they enrolled us in this UC Berkeley Haas School of Business hardware accelerator. And Andrew Marquis and Mark Searle were our mentors. And then we had this whole host of mentors from Intel that also joined us on set and were assigned to us to help us and guide us in sort of the specifications of the Curie module, which we didn't have yet, right? In our first week, we had nothing. And then just to be kind of there to guide us as our experts. So it was really cool. We were on the set, we were doing the hard work, and yet we also had this group of people around us. And the group became very quickly tied together. Like, we were not competing with each other. It felt like we were all together in this whole process. So it was like going to Maker Fair camp or something like that. You know, everybody was really cool. We enjoyed each other's company. They fed us well. Um,
Yeah.
but here's the thing. So we're in this process of doing this. Jeff and Duppy, like, I just couldn't believe it. Within a couple of days, they already had prototypes, working prototypes. And I'm going to show this video, Duppy, of you demoing this prototype that this was probably like 3 or 4 days.
Yep.
I'll connect to the dog tag. The light turns on when I connect to it. Okay? I'll hold it here from now on. Can you read that? I can go to the LED. Write new value. 0. Done. LED goes on.
Yeah, let me get a plug in for Jeff there real quick. So both of us could do
Yeah.
either thing, but Jeff kind of gravitated towards the firmware. I do hardware and firmware, but I did the hardware and the firmware. And so I hit it off with Jeff just really quickly. Great. And we just, yeah, it was just super fun time. One of the fastest creative things. So Jeff was firmware, I was hardware, and we just took off.
And here's the most amazing thing. You realized very early on that in order for it to be sort of made for TV, it had to be visual. And what you did was you put a light on it, and the light indicator was basically data collected on or transmitting. And that was like that. To this day, HerdDogg's big thing is that the tags illuminate. Like literally, that was the first thing you did. You like soldered the light on there, and then you had a way in which you could turn up the temperature, you could turn down the temperature. You had a bunch of sensors working, but by using light as an indicator, it was much more clear to anybody that's looking at this device that it's actually doing something, right? So I just love this video because it's like, here, look what we've done in 3 days. Like and it's got the cell phone. I mean, you and Jeff were amazing what you were able to come up with.
That was fun. That was a really fun time. And I remember how so our team was HerdDogg, and everything was like dogs, HerdDogg. So we had the dog tags and the dog bones, right? And we're all working together. All the teams are there, all working together, together, kind of a competition. We're working a lot more together than the producers wanted. They wanted to create drama. We were helping each other. But we every time we got a new thing done, like we're crossing off chest list for that day, like, whoever got it, Jeff and I, we'd both go like, remember, we'd like, when we're ready, we'd go, woof.
Oh, that's right. That's
So
right.
we just all working quietly, we're doing there, but like the teams knew we were getting stuff done because whenever we finished something, we let out that big wolf.
And here's the funniest thing. I
Yeah.
saw the current CEO of HerdDogg interviewed on some podcast, and the guy that the host of the podcast said, "So, tell me about the name HerdDogg." And he said, "Oh, it was the founder of the company had a small operation in Oregon running cattle, and that's where it came from." And I was like, "You had no idea." So here's a really cool thing. So herd, obviously the herd part, but dog means data generator gatherer. Data
Oh, that's right.
generator
DOGG. That's why we
gatherer.
had two G's.
Right. And then
Data
you,
generator
during the
gatherer,
show,
right?
you're like, it should be 3 G's because it'll be data generator gatherer grok. Grok. Remember that? You're like, and grok.
Oh yeah, the whole thing about the Internet of Things, right? Is you have this information knowledge. It came from the stack being like you just have data, which gets information, which gets knowledge, and then ultimately wisdom and grok. When you really grok something,
And
it's that wisdom you get from all the
thing I just
data.
love
Yeah.
so much is that Elon now has grok embedded in X, and I'm like, that was
Yeah,
that
Grok was a
was
thing
my
before
partner's
Elon. Elon
idea
didn't
so
invent
long
the
ago,
Grok.
and now grok has become like an AI thing, and I just love that.
Oh yeah, it would doubly work now. Yeah, this was way before
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah,
It would-
well,
we should
livestock
get
AI,
that.
livestock
Yeah.
AI. I mean, I think they're using that term now, but I've been already using it about a year ago, and so they're
Yeah,
probably
we were way ahead of the time because we
Oh.
added by the end of, by the time we shipped, which was less than a year, yeah, we hired in machine learning AI. It wasn't called that then, I don't think. They just called them data scientists.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and was turning the raw data into into actual health events,
Yep.
right?
Yeah. So
So
for
that was
those of you out there that wondered, it's HerdDogg. The dog
mhm.
is data generator, gatherer, and we should put
Yeah.
in parentheses grok because that was truly the origin of the name. And at that point, we changed the name officially to HerdDogg. It became its own entity. Um, and that was just around 11/11/2025, which is our actual birthday of the company HerdDogg. And so
Yeah, 11/11/2015 was the date, but
2015.
we're coming up very soon.
Yeah, we're coming
Next
up on
month
our
is a
10th year
year.
anniversary, which is pretty cool. We're the only company of the companies that were on that TV show that's still around.
Yeah.
And it wasn't too long after the end of the show that we became one of the few companies that were still around. But now HerdDogg, I think, is the only retained company that's still
Mhm.
around. I think they should do another reality TV show with Mark Burnett, don't you? Like just HerdDogg, just HerdDogg founders. Where are they today? So that was an extraordinary week. I think being around you and Jeff, I had such a great team, and being around all the other teams, we were all doing really cool things. Like, we had the guy that had a drone that he was navigating with his brain. Remember him? He's done some cool stuff. Um,
Mhm.
the guys that were doing the football concussion thing, um, the little girl that did the band, the
Mhm.
medical band. Um, I'm going to put some footage of us on the TV show in the next episode just because it happened next year. But I we did, I mean, they filmed us all the time while we were in the tech shop. And I just thought the promos for the show were so great because they show us all kind of heads down at our tables
Mhm.
with all these, like, air compressor coils and things like that, that just, it
Mhm.
made us look like serious geeks. Um, so we did in fact continue after this week of filming for the show. Every week we had to check in with our hardware accelerator, and we had to
Mhm.
make presentations around very specific things like value proposition. Um, One of the big things they did was Steve Blank's concept of getting out of the building. And that was the
Mhm.
one that I was most keen about. So I spent a lot of time calling farmers and ranchers and just asking them, like, what do you need technology for to do on your livestock, and how much would you spend on it, and just these various value proposition questions. That was a great deal of fun. And I think during that first week, Duppy, correct me if I'm well. Okay, so we had the dimensions of what you'd
Mhm.
built, and so we were able to order 3D printed versions of the technology and
Mhm.
the tags, the ear tag and the dog bone. And I think we were kind of way ahead in that process, right? Like
Yeah.
we'd figured that stuff out fairly quickly.
Mhm.
Once you guys had given me the package size, I could order it. So we had two pieces. We had the
Mhm.
dog tag, which was on the
Mhm.
animal's ear, and then we had the dog bone, which was a bone, literally, and it was the reader. It was the thing that you just get as close as you need to for Bluetooth to collect the data off of that
The
tag.
initial concept was a dog wore the dog bone because the dog was out there herding the cattle, and figured the dog would be the closest to the cattle to gather the data.
I still think that's the
People
best
love that.
idea. I mean,
Yeah. Well, it is. I
it
think it
is.
is
It's like
too.
truly like,
We ended up pivoting. We ended up pivoting towards dairy, and with dairy, twice a day at
yeah.
least. Twice a day they all come through. They all come through the milking machine. So it turns out, having a dog bone there at the milking machines is what we settled on, right?
So that show, the first part of the show was in November, and then all of December, we were just like heads down working. They were going to be showing up at our offices in Oregon to do kind of the prequel work for the TV show. And I think that was my favorite part of all, because it wasn't on the set of the TV show where we're just doing like
Hmm.
demonstration stuff. It was like, this is where we live, this is where we work. And then we went out and spent time at C2 Ranch outside of
Yep.
Medford, Oregon, which was a
Hmm.
beautiful ranch anyway. And then it was cowboys on horseback and
Hmm.
cattle, and just a beautiful part of the country. And
Yeah,
um,
when Steve Link says get out of the building, and he was a big influence on on the whole Lean Startup book by Eric Ries. Get out of the building, get out in the field, and we were really in the field, right?
we were
We were
literally in the field.
really in the field.
But it was also so rich. Like, we had
Mhm.
drones flying overhead, and
Mhm.
they had GoPros on the cowboys and on the dogs,
Mhm.
and you
Mhm.
had the real feeling of what it looks like on a cattle ranch. And I think it was so picturesque to have this
Mhm.
this herd of cattle. And then they had us interviewed in the barn. Remember that beautiful barn? Turn
Yeah,
of the
the bar
century
was great.
barn. So it really
Mhm.
made for good TV. And I think it also, I just think our team, our filming team, our producing team loved us, because it was just so different than what they got to normally do with, any kind of tech is usually in a, office building somewhere. And
Mhm.
for the most part, they were. So, yeah, that was really fun. And then it was crunch time. We ended up having to come to an understanding of what we were going to do with the technology that was different than what Intel had originally intended, which that was par for the course, right? Like,
Yeah, we were using some features that they were going to have but didn't have working yet. So there's a
right,
lot
we
of
needed those features.
demo, demo smoke and mirrors. I was surprised how many, even though we were doing it for a TV show and a competition, and I like that. That really gave. I think it gave me a lot. Well, one, it was the first time that we owned the company, right? And Melissa, you did all the customer contact, and I was clearly all the engineering. So I had even more freedom. I worked in a great companies that gave me a ton of freedom, but I had even more freedom to just run it the way I wanted to run it. But I also think it starting off as kind of a competition game show, I think gave me permission to kind of go. Kind of take these concepts of iterating really fast, to more extreme than honestly even I might not have been brave enough to do if it was just a normal startup. But what I learned in hindsight was I maybe even didn't go far enough, right? I mean, it just I can't stress enough how much it worked, and it's just I believe me, you just got to try it. But those concepts, I know because I was one of those engineers, and I talked to people. They seem way out there, far out there, to iterate so fast, so scrappy. It seems scary, but your goal at first isn't necessarily the rock solid firmware or hardware. Your goal is gathering customer data, right? Your goal is gathering, does this really do what the customer wants, right? And it just needs to work. It needs to work well enough to gather that data, but only that well, right? And
I
then later, once you're confident you got something people really want, then you switch into a mode of finalizing, you know.
And I think you're right. We had these forces that were like
Mhm.
channeling us into having to
Mhm.
make really tough decisions very quickly. And I
Mhm.
mean, it was it was so much better having an external force than having an individual member of the team going, "Well, no, I got other things I got to work on," or that there wasn't the dynamic of like, oh, somebody on the team isn't able to do what they need to do in the time they need to do it. It was just
Mhm.
like, we have this much time, we have this much money, we got to make it work somehow, some
Mhm.
way. And literally, with $10,000, we did
Uh-huh.
the entire demonstration. And that wasn't just the equipment, that was
Mhm.
all of the work that you and Jeff were doing, and the printing, multiple printing, I think we did at one point. And then we bought the animals that were going to be on the show, which we will go into on our next episode. I mean, it was all in there. We didn't
Mhm.
add additional money. We made it work, and and then just having the discipline from the hardware accelerator on top of that pressure that they're not going to change the days in which you're going to be doing the filming. It's this is the day we're showing up, you better be ready. And I think it really helped us. We were also, we'd been through a couple of startups at that point, Duppy. It wasn't like
Yeah.
we'd
Yeah.
never done this before. We were both
Hmm.
pretty seasoned professionals, both in terms of, like I said, working, me at Apple, you at Microsoft, with this
Hmm.
discipline of, what technology really requires of you, touching all of those points, and then having done startups ourselves where we're just by the seat of our pants and, a few dollars in the bank, being able to come up with something. But that was truly an epic moment. I think,
Hmm.
quite frankly, if you're going to do an accelerator, and I've been
Hmm.
through so many accelerators now that are just not, they're just not doing much. Like they're not getting the companies to a point where they need to be in order to execute. They're kind of just working on training of, one thing or another, time management, or put your pitch together, and those are not the elements that make a company work. Those are the elements that please the VCs maybe, and some audience. But to really make a company legitimately function, you've got to have some of these other things: the customer figured out, the product working.
Hmm. Yeah, one of the it reminds me one of the and maybe we'll talk more when we have Mark Searle on, but like yeah, that Berkeley Law School of Entrepreneurship class they put us through, and it's a class they give at Berkeley to students like full time. They cram the whole semester in. That really was one of the biggest benefits of the show.
Really was.
Melissa, I'll brag for you. One of the tasks of these classes, when talking to customers, was they gave an award to who'd done the most, and you beat everybody by double or more. It was
Oh.
100. It was 100. It was in the 200 or 300s. I mean, when Liz said earlier she called ranchers and stuff, right? No, it wasn't just call every day, right? It was. Do you remember? It
It
was
was
well above
multiple
100. I
calls.
want to say 200 or
Yeah,
she called a lot of
I
ranchers,
did.
right?
I called a lot of ranchers.
Yeah, and got really good data from them too,
Yeah.
right?
And
That's
I
that's
went
a
to
different
the
that's a skill that I don't have. I draw circuit diagrams.
I also went to the Bison trade show, which was my first
Mhm.
ever trade show. Wow, that's going to be a 10-year anniversary too.
Yeah.
So the National Bison Association has a trade show
Hmm.
in January, which just was the only one that I could go to prior to us filming again. The other ones are later in February and so forth. So I was able to squeeze that one in. And even though it wasn't our primary species target and it was bison,
Hmm.
it was super helpful for me to be able to talk to some of those producers in person and say, we're trying
Hmm.
to do this. What do you think of that? And they had never had anybody show up like me before to just say, I'm here to ask questions. And it was really fun. So,
Yeah, I remember my point when you were to roll back when you were talking about um, what say some other accelerators might not be doing as much as we learned there, how they're doing the things that make some VCs, not all, some VCs or some businesses look, they want you to look like a real company. One of the biggest insights, really critical insights from kind of Steve Blank's stuff and Eric Ries's books, Lean Startup, it was a realization that a startup isn't everybody. There used to be an old thinking where they just thought a startup as like a small big company, and so all the
right.
standard Harvard MBA business studies, which are totally valid for established market, big companies, right? It's not just take those to make them smaller. It's completely different. And so they define startup, if I can get this close to right, paraphrasing, a startup as a temporary organization in search of, a market segment and business model that works.
So next time we'll get into the actual filming of the show. We'll
Mhm.
get Mark on and talk to Mark more about the hardware accelerator. We'll talk about some of our early production, which I think is probably the most interesting of all. And then our patents. You and I authoring the initial HerdDogg patents. One thing
Mhm.
that's a total shock to me is that they're not still doing ear temperature. They do herd temperature, which is the ambient temperature. So we put two temperature sensors on the actual ear tag. One was the
Mhm.
physical animal's ear temperature, and then the herd temperature, which is this ambient temperature, which is spread across the animals in the herd. And that herd temperature is on the tag still, but the original animal temperature, animal ear temperature, is not. And it goes into great detail in our patents,
Mhm.
how and what the power of that data point really is. So we'll talk about that more next time, and bring on Mark as a guest.
Mhm.
The next time is going to be great because, yeah, watching us on TV and, hearing some of this backstory now, it sort of, brings you to where you can really appreciate what we actually pulled off. Because to
Mhm.
this day, I'm just totally impressed, and you can see it in the reaction of the judges. They were blown away by what we did. I don't even know how we pulled it off, but yet we did it. So
Uh, I got a lot of learnings from there that I continue to use, and it was fun to go back down memory lane and kind of be reminded of the origin story of a lot of my habits these days.